of the last 5 years, the events of the last 5 months even consistently brought the conversation on mental health to the forefront like it's never been before. Organizations across the state recently, large and small, have begun exploring ways to incorporate mental health safety into their workplace cultures. Hence today's discussion on why mental health is a critical business conversation and not simply a wellness endeavor. Today's session will be a structured interview between Dr. Goss and Melissa Doman with open Q&A. Please feel free to ask questions and engage in the chat as the session is made for you. Now I'm honored to introduce you to my friend, Melissa Doman, or Mel. Melissa is an organizational psychologist, a former clinical mental health therapist, author of Yes, You Can Talk About Mental Health at Work, Here's Why and How to Do It Really Well. There's the book here. I don't know where my camera, oh, there's my camera. And founder of the Workplace Mental Health Method. Her second book, Cornered Office, Why We Need to Talk About Leadership Mental Health, will be released in early February 2026. Mel works with companies across industries around the globe, including clients like Google, Dow Jones, Microsoft, Salesforce, Siemens, Estee Lauder, and Janssen. She's spoken at South by Southwest and has been featured as a subject matter expert in Vogue, the BBC, CNBC Incorporated, and in LinkedIn's top 10 voices on mental health. She has one core goal: to equip companies, individuals, and leaders to have constructive conversations about mental health, team dynamics, and communication in the workplace. Her work and book aim to accomplish just that. I first met Mel about 2 years ago. She was here at an event for HMSA, and we've become great friends since, and we are trying to have her back next year. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Goss and Mel.
Thank you so much, Brian. I've been so looking forward to this event and collaborating with you, Miss Disa, and anything to help Mental Health America and especially Mental Health America Hawaii.
We're really excited to have you here. And I have to say, I love the title of your book. I think it really
Thanks.
starts to kind of, I think it really starts to kind of open up and make us a little bit more comfortable, even talking
Yeah.
about this topic. So I did
Yeah.
have some questions that I was kind of curious about what you'd say. And the first
Bring
one
it.
is, all right, perfect. Why do you think mental health conversations at work are so critical? And
Yeah.
how do you think it would benefit like our well-being and just our capacity to function?
Oh, I love that question. And I think, and I'm sure you'll agree, I think the question is, how could it not be a critical conversation? And the way I look at it is it's freaking tough out there and even tougher in here. That's not going to change. Being alive is the cost of doing business. And the longer we go through the space-time continuum and into modern life, the stressors are more complex. There are more of them. What is expected of us, there's more. It's not the same world as even 10, 20, 30 years ago. So the way I look at it is, we spend, depending on your setup, obviously, the people we spend the most time with each week are the people we work with. We spend at least a third of our life, if not more, at work. And honestly, I see it as a language we all need to know how to speak, a form of communicational literacy that we all need to have. And when it comes to our general well-being, our cognitive functioning, our professional functioning, our social health, I just don't understand with such a critical organ, and it's just an organ, because people get a little strange about this one because, governs our personality, all our decision making, how we work, no big deal. It is an organ with a health, stress, and illness state. So I see it as maintenance of the machine. And I understand that it's wrapped in lots of biases and personal narrative and social rules, and we'll talk about that. I respect that. I understand that. But when it comes to just general functioning, with how hard it is to do that these days, I don't see any other option.
I love that. I like kind of reframing our experiences and kind of where our brain sits instead of making it like personal and professional, just to really talk about how we as beings and our brains kind of attend both and they are in both.
Yes, one body,
Yeah.
one brain. And it's, we all, yes, our mental health experiences are extraordinarily personal, but medically, we all have mental health, our baseline social, emotional, and cognitive functioning. I assume, given our shared profession, Miss Cisa, that I hope you've seen Inside Out. Inside
Yes.
Out 2,
Yes.
because you know us 40-year-olds needing to have our anxiety plushies from Inside Out 2. For those of you who have maybe not seen Inside Out 2, this movie's really for adults, as is the first one. Great, psychosocial education, highly recommend. And I like the feeling wheel from Gloria Wilcox, Willcox. You would be shocked the education that that gives. And none of those emotions are clinical, by the way. We all come pre-programmed out of the box with all these emotions, many of which are not very pleasant. And it's to evolutionarily tell ourselves and other people how to respond to the stimuli in our environment, if we need support, if something is wrong, if there's a threat of some kind. My husband, bless that man, actually bought a pillow with all the feelings on
Oh,
it.
nice. Yeah.
So if we're having, those greatest hits marriage fights, I like to call them, I go, get your pillow, use your feeling words, and it's a real relationship saver, guys.
Love it.
Yeah.
When you talk about like emotions being very like evolutionary and helping us figure out what to do about them, why do you think that historically in general we've been so uncomfortable even having conversations about that or mental health in the workplace?
I'm gonna get a little meta for a second, if that's okay. Not like the
Yeah.
company, like in the actual sense. Um, I feel like I'm dating myself. When it first came out in my day, it was just called Facebook. Um, so, just to kind of zoom out for a minute, not to sound too nihilist or anything, but if you think about it, we are animals who can talk. And so, with that as the premise, and if you think about all the industries we've created, all the companies, all the services, all the products, everything is created. It's all been created. And so, what that means is the concept of work and what is appropriate at work and things we're supposed to or not supposed to talk about at work is also created. So, if we think about the long-term narrative of the exchange of, work for money, a lot of rules have kind of been wrapped around that for decades and decades and millennia. And so if we think about emotional struggling, that was never really factored into the equation in the exchange of work for finances, like ever. And I'm talking a lot about that in the new book, especially around the concepts like, oh, leaders don't need mental health support. What? They're the same species. I won't digress. But if you think about that, it was never factored into the equation that it's a personal thing that you keep outside of work because it's not in the contract between worker and organization. Now, since that point, a lot of things have changed. We have psychological safety. We have the psychological contract with organizations that, if I do this work for you, you're generally going to look out for me while I do it and not institutionally betray me, which is like a whole nother kettle of fish. And so now when we have folks saying, I feel like I'm going to pop, I don't just necessarily need to talk about a mental health condition, even though 1 in 4 people will have a mental health condition in their lifetime, if not more, ever since the pandemic, because the data is not going in a great direction. You know what I'm saying? And so, on top of that, you have people who are quite concerned that for a topic that many people misunderstand and some people abuse, that their healthy, reasonable disclosure asking for help may be weaponized against them. And it is. It happens all the time. I wouldn't have a job if it wasn't happening because there are many occasions where, we're doing this work trying to help companies understand you can be compliant with care and have general mental health conversations and understand that general mental health functioning is not inextricably tied to performance and capability. They can coexist at the same time in many, 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 many cases. So it's not historically discussed because many times, in addition to the creation of this archetype of work, that it hasn't gone very well because a lot of education wasn't really happening on this until the past 5 to 10 years. So there's a lot of catching up to do. And on top of that, it's not just saying, oh, mental health is important at work. You got to teach people how to have the conversation because you can't be like, okay, off you go. We told you it's important. There's a way to do it and there's a way not to do it. And so historically, that training just hasn't been there. So people avoid it or they do it and they pray that it'll go a little better.
Yeah, I think that like when you talk about, just having a conversation about mental health in the workplace and be like, okay, and then, go live well. And we said that mental health was important. It just kind of reminds me, and we'll keep anonymity, but working in a place where it was very much espoused that mental health was important. And yet the day-to-day, the policies and procedures in place were non-supportive of workers actually being able to do the mental health. So what do you
Yeah,
think are just basic barriers, are there real or perceived, that
yeah.
people have that make it hard to do that?
I like that you said real versus perceived. And, when people are saying mental health is important, but they don't do it, I call it all newsletter, no action. And, I, I don't want to digress. But I think that when it comes to those barriers, I tend to separate them into kind of inside of work barriers and outside of work barriers, just to keep it easy to understand. So let's start with outside of work. Even though we all medically have mental health, we have very, very different experiences around that. And it doesn't matter if we're in a physical building or we are virtually dialing in, we carry those experiences with us into the workplace. So, all the different pieces of our identity, our gender, our sexual orientation, the family that raised us, our ethnicity, our culture of origin, our country of origin, if you follow a religion, all these sorts of things that shape how we view mental health, stress, mental illness, asking for help, if that's even acknowledged in certain circles, because in some it's not even now. So it doesn't matter in some organizations when we say we all have mental health, because if you have, for example, a 65-year-old man from Ghana who has moved to San Diego, that's he's not going to have the same experiences as a third generation 25-year-old Caucasian female working for the same company. It doesn't matter that you're standing on the same soil or dialing into the same company. And then if you also look at inside of work factors, there's a whole bunch there. But let's start with just a few. So mental health and mental illness language is much easier to warp and abuse in the workplace, that it kind of destroys psychological safety for those who are privately struggling. So let's say, for example, Misty said throughout your career, have you ever really met anybody who said something sounding like, oh, my stomach hurts like I have Crohn's disease? No. Have you ever
No.
said, oh gosh, I ran so hard, my lungs hurt like I have emphysema? But what you do here
Mhm.
is I'm so OCD about getting this report right. Are you? Do you really have PTSD from that meeting? And my least favorite, trigger warning, the amount of times I hear people say something so absurd, like, oh, blah, blah was so hard, I want to kill myself. How dare you say such a thing? It is such a casually used phrase that when you, let's say, somebody that they lost someone to suicide, or let's say that they privately struggle with a mood disorder, or let's say that they're edging on burnout. We're not just talking about mental illness. What is the likelihood that someone is going to speak up in an organization where people say inappropriate or silly or incorrect things about mental health and mental illness? It's not as likely because people don't want to be judged. They don't want to be seen differently. If we're also looking at, let's say, leadership stoicism, for example, people tend to look to others for especially those in position of power, for an understanding of the written and unwritten rules in an organization. Now, if you have leaders who are consistently stoic or constantly fine, which I learned last year stands for feelings inside not expressed. And it blew my mind. I was like, I'm never going to say fine again because that's not an emotion. Uh, and so, if you have leaders who are constantly fine, they're stoic, people look to their leaders for those rules. And if they're not talking about it, it makes them slightly less likely to talk about it themselves. Although we are seeing intergenerational differences in the workplace, despite a lack of role modeling in certain circles. And another thing is around a concept that I coined called well-being shaming. This happens all the time, even now. And so it's basically, let's say, for example, that you're working for an organization and you stop work at 3 o'clock on a Friday, just to give you an example. And someone says, "Oh, I wish I didn't have as much work as you did, so I could stop at 3 o'clock on a Friday." Or where do you find the time to go for a run at lunch? Or other things where they are making you feel guilty for trying to achieve work-life integration. I don't say balance because who actually balances that super well? Like that's pretty hard. And so where someone makes you feel guilty because they're either quietly jealous, they are towing the company line and judging you, or they don't know how to do it and they're too afraid to ask. So, I mean, I'm more direct than most, in case you can't tell. And so I tend to take the approach that if, because I used to work in corporate, I wasn't always self-employed. And so if someone would say something so silly to me, I would say something to the effect of doing things for my mental health is a healthy adult practice. Can you help me understand why you don't agree? That's it. Because I'm not name calling, I'm not being rude, I'm not being defensive. I'm explaining this is what I'm doing, this is why it's good, and I'm inviting a conversation to understand why they don't agree because they may not even be doing that on purpose. They may just be like, why am I doing that? And in other cases, someone will accuse you of being defensive because they know they're wrong and don't have the maturity to admit it. So there's a lot more stuff I could talk about, but I'm conscious we still have more things to cover.
Well, I actually kind of want to stay on it for just a
Please,
minute because
sure. Yeah.
yeah, because I think that you're talking about the ways that conversations happen at the workplace when people have all these different things that they're breathing in, their own struggles
Yeah.
that maybe they're having and not having as much work balance. So
Hmm.
how do we, because I loved that example of talking about yourself and saying like, this is what I'm doing. So let me know how, that's showing up in your life and how the comment is happening. I love that non-defensiveness. How do we normalize conversations in the workplace around mental health in healthy ways like that?
So it's funny. I went to the Adler School of Professional Psychology. Love that school. Now it's called Adler University, but I'm like, I'm not calling it that. So, what I loved about Adler, and the funny thing is that he was around the same time as Freud, but never got the press. No one knows who he is. And the
I
funny
love
thing
that.
is, people reference his concepts all the time. Like if someone has a Napoleon complex, where they're compensating because they're little, or talking about how eldest children act versus babies, that's all Adler. And what I love about him is that he looks at, the internal system, the family system, the social system, and that human beings are generally trying to overcome feelings of inferiority. And, that's another kettle of fish. But what I love is his concept of acting as if, not as if like from Clueless, from Cher, but acting as if the person you want to be, the type of normal that you want to have. So I use that as a reference because the more people who talk about it embedding it in daily conversations. And this doesn't mean sharing a 30-year mental health history. This just means not lying. Can I say a teeny tiny adult bad word? Is that okay? Is that okay
Yeah.
with the audience? Just not lying if you feel like shit. Don't say you're fine if you're not fine. And just making it more accessible, like about the whole spectrum of mental health, not just mental health conditions. If you're dealing with burnout, if you're dealing with caregiver burnout, or you are struggling, or whatever it is. So it's really just little moments each day where we can incorporate these little disclosures to make it more common, make it more normalized, so it doesn't feel as infrequent or strange. Because the more often things happen, the more socialized people become to it, generally speaking. Now, this will never be 100% accepted by all 8 billion people on this planet. That's not how humanity works. The goal is to get it as common as possible. So, in the circles that don't, are kind of like an old version of the like cultural zeitgeist, per se. That's the goal. So, I would just say find little moments where you can just, and this, if the word vulnerability doesn't work for you, don't use it. It doesn't work for me. I use the word honesty. Just find little moments of honesty where you're like, I've been like feeling really down recently, or I am feeling really stressed out, or just little things you can do. Because the more common it is, the more socialized people will get to it.
It really kind of speaks to all the things that kind of we can do to support each other. But I'm still kind of thinking about that fine comment and the definition that you had when you spoke
Tell
to like
me.
stoic and reserved managers. Just kind of questioning like what would be the role of managers in kind of having those conversations in a workplace? How can they
Yeah.
start to shift?
So I think there are two sides here that I'd like to cover. So first, looking at the managerial role around mental health in the workplace. Now, managers, in addition to HR, company owners, they are touched by compliance. So what I mean by that is that when people are disclosing, I like to start with this stuff up front because it's what scares people the most. So when people are disclosing things around mental health in the workplace, especially if they have a diagnosed mental health condition, they are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, what qualifies as a disability is quite broad. If you want to learn about that, it is on the ADA website. I think it's ada.org. Please don't quote me on that. But that is the place to get that information. Now, there is a difference between a mental illness disclosure versus talking about general mental health. Inquiring about someone's general well-being is not illegal. There is a big difference between saying, you don't seem like yourself, are you doing okay? Versus, do you have major depressive disorder? There is a huge difference, big difference. But the goal for managers is not to be therapists, not to be psychiatrists, not to be caseworkers, not to be mommy and daddy. The goal is for them to be caring triagers, where they are keeping a general sense of their team's well being and to make sure that those team members get the right support if they need support. It's duty of care, which the US doesn't always do so well. The UK and the EU are really, really good at that. And they actually have laws around that, organizational duty of care, not just for the physical safety of workers, but the emotional safety of workers as well. Um, so really just making sure to have a general pulse on that well-being and making sure people feel supported. Do they need to speak to HR for accommodations? Is there just some acknowledgement of communication style, or needing to change work patterns if possible, not always possible. And so I think it's really important that they kind of see themselves as this might sound terribly dispassionate, carrying how do I want to say this? I'm trying to think of like an object that does what I'm trying to do. Carrying redirectors, basically. because you want to have that rapport, you want to have that connection, and it's work. It is work. So we're not saying that everybody who, it's one thing to struggle with mental health, but it's another thing to do something about it, provided you have access to resources and you can afford to use them, because that's also really critical. So, struggling with mental health doesn't mean you get a permanent pass. If you're struggling as a responsible adult, you got to deal with it. And that looks different for everybody. But, it's kind of like the two parts of emotional intelligence. Like it's one thing to be self-aware, it's another thing to self-manage. Mental health is no different. And so there's a fine line there in terms of when that can get kind of hairy. And that's actually why I partnered with an employment attorney, where we have a mental health compliance deliverable that we deliver to businesses, because you'd be shocked how many, or maybe not, about how many businesses will just avoid these conversations because they don't want to do something illegal. And I go, how's that working out for you? How's it working out for you? Because education is power in this case. And so I found the one funny, accessible, easy to listen to attorney in the United States, and I partnered with her, and we deliver this program called The Right Stuff, mental health and legal approaches to mental health at work. And so I think that managers need that education, and so do HR, health and safety, owners, things like that. And really understanding that their goal is to be, the supportive triager. That's the goal. Not to be like, "Oh, thanks for telling me," punt. That's not it. "Thanks for telling me. How can I help you? Can you help me understand the problem? Do you feel like you want to pursue resources? Do you want help with that?" You're noticing that it's caring, but it's at a high level. But something else to think about that most most organizations will gloss over is managers need mental health support too. I'm going to say that again. Managers need mental health support too. They are the same species as every other person in an organization, and often have the overwhelming majority, if not entire, responsibility to support mental health in their organization. And that care is not often turned towards them. So please make sure that if you're going to be asking managers and leaders to support the mental health of those they lead, that managers need mental health support too.
I know I like this concept of triaging, like a quick assessment and then a connection, right? To be real clear
Hmm.
about your roles, be real clear and comfortable in having those conversations. And I think
Yeah.
for me, and maybe it's my background, but I always really appreciate having like skills or techniques that I know that I can use when I'm in different types of situations. And so now that we're maybe getting a little bit more comfortable in this idea of talking about mental health in the workplace, what do you
Hmm.
have as like recommendations or tips for how we can start to do that if today that's a
Yeah.
conversation that I need to have with somebody?
Well, honestly, and again, I'm answering it this way because this is why I created these resources. So that is why I wrote the first book. That's why I have the workshops I do. That's why I have my second book coming out. It's about instructing people how to actually have conversations and not be a symptom watcher. That is a big, in my opinion, miss with a lot of mental health training, is that people are teaching businesses how to recognize symptoms of anxiety, depression, distress. Do I think that's important? Absolutely. Especially when it comes to like emergency mental health protocols, which most businesses don't have, where it can be a potential life or death situation. But unfortunately, I think a lot of those programs focus on here's how to recognize anxiety and depression and direct people to resources. But there's not a lot of training on the conversations, because the conversations really matter. We don't want to train people up to be symptom watchers in the workplace. It's inappropriate. There is a place, but it's not complete. So when it comes to starting those conversations, again, I'm very conscious of time. So I'll give like a few examples, from the book and my work, but when it comes to starting these sorts of conversations. A lot of times, we got to understand that people don't like to be told how to think or what they're thinking, how they're feeling, or what they're doing. They like to be asked. And in certain cases, some people actually feel being asked is invasive. So I think that statement of intention when you're sharing with someone that you're concerned is critical because imagine you've never been approached by a colleague or a boss and they're inquiring about your mental health without reason. What do you think they're going to think? I'm getting fired. That's what most people will think. There's a difference between you haven't been performing or acting like yourself the last few weeks, like what's up, versus I'm noticing that you are kind of speaking a bit differently or acting a little differently. I don't want to assume the reason. I hope it's okay. I'm checking in. Like, is everything okay? I'm happy to like go for a walk or have some coffee, if you want to have a chat. They have the right to say no. They don't have to say yes. But you want to state why you're bringing it up, what you're trying to achieve. You're not assuming what's going on. You're making yourself available. Option without obligation. Now, if they do want to talk, great news. But don't jump into giving advice, especially at the beginning, because sometimes good help doesn't mean giving advice. It just means listening. And oftentimes, we're taught that good help looks like giving advice. But the problem is that if someone starts talking and they go, oh, here's what you should do, what that means is you're not listening. You're just plugging me into this archetype based on other people and situations, and you are deciding what's best for me. But there's a difference if they're sharing something and you've gone through something similar, someone you know has gone through something similar. Give them the choice, and you can say, my sister went through something really similar. Is it helpful if I shared how she dealt with it? You can totally say no. Let them choose. And you really want to focus on the conversation, whether it's in person, whether it's virtual. Don't pay attention to this. Don't pay attention to email. Focus on what they're saying. Give the conversation the time and attention it deserves. Because if you're talking to someone about something really tough and they seem distracted, that's not going to feel very good. And, for those of you who may struggle with interrupting, like myself, really, really try to listen, not listen to respond. There's a difference. Now, there's lots and lots and lots of other methods. I would suggest it's all in the book. I know we don't have time to talk about it today, but if you're receiving a conversation, uh, I think that there are lots of ways to do that. And on top of that, if you are feeling uncomfortable with the person who's asking, you don't want to verbally skewer them, but you can say, I appreciate your concern. I'm not really up for talking, or just, acknowledging the effort, but saying, no, thank you. Or if you do want to talk with the person, but you're not in the right headspace, you don't want them to regret trying to help you. So you could say something like, I really appreciate you asking. I'm not feeling great right now, and I have this massive deadline by 4 o'clock. Could we talk at the end of the day? Is that cool? Because you want to show, I appreciate your checking on me. Now is not the time. But if you do want to talk to them, make it easier for them to help you. People are generally not mind readers. They're not clairvoyants. They're psychics. And no offense to anybody who may believe on that in this call. I don't mean to offend. You never know who's on. And the thing is that you want to be very clear about what the problem is, how they can help you, what you're prepared to do, and where you would like the conversation to go or not go. And say, these are my concerns about speaking up. I'm struggling with this. You want to give the critical information people need to help you because otherwise they don't know. So there's a lot more I could share, but I am so conscious of time.
I want to be conscious of time as well because you brought up so many fantastic points. And to kind of that matter, my takeaway definitely is going to be this concept of it's okay to reach out and talk to people, but doing it with intentionality and with really supportive, appropriate languaging is kind of what helps do
Yes.
this. So, what do you
Yes.
think of all the things we've talked about this far? You would want to be a key takeaway for all of us?
Well, before we get into these awesome questions that I see in the Q&A in the chat, I'm so thrilled to get to those. I'm going to keep it really simple. All I want for those of you who signed on today to do is to decide what was your key takeaway and what you're going to do with it. Because if you just came to hear me yak at you, all you did was take a break from work. And I'm all about taking breaks from work. But I would rather you do something with what you've learned if you want to change outcomes for yourself and for others. And that's it.
Thank you so much. I do
Yeah,
want to have time to answer some of the questions that are coming up. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Brian for Q&A.
great. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you. It truly a critical conversation. It was
Oh,
very nice sitting here learning from you. There are a couple of questions in the chat,
yes.
and some of them you touched on already. The
Yeah.
first one being, do you think management at most businesses, or maybe you've seen or experienced those who present as being a mentally safe work environment or supportive of mental wellness,
Hmm.
ultimately hold it against you if you reach out for help?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. 100 times yes.
Okay.
And there are different ways to deal with that. Now, something that I often talk about is just because it feels like a bait and switch
Hmm.
or a bit two-faced, there are different degrees of that. So there are many organizations that they're like, yeah, we're psychologically safe. We're here for it because they like the idea. But then in practice, they totally screw it up. So there are opportunities depending on the grade of the screw up. In some cases, it's salvageable. In other cases, it's not. So let's say, for example, that just poorly handled conversations, no laws are broken, but people are just being buttheads about the whole thing. Then it comes down to self-advocacy and saying, I enjoy working here because of ABC. And I've always been made to feel like this is a psychologically safe workplace. So I took that steer and told you what was going on with me, and it did not go well. I don't want to assume why you handled it this way, but I want to give you the opportunity to fix it. Can we work this out? Yes, that is possible. Is that all situations? No. But who knows why it went poorly? So, depending on what's going on, there is an opportunity to repair. Now, in other cases, if that's resulting in a hostile work environment, if it's resulting in, ADA protected health information not being handled the right way by an HR department when that needs to be separate from an employee file, if it results in harassment, then it needs to escalate to a legal situation because, and this is why I partner with the employment attorney, is because, there are individual rights that need to be protected. And there are other cases, and this is a very unpopular opinion, there are other cases where some people will kind of jump on the mental health bandwagon and weaponize information in very inappropriate ways. So I don't pick sides because they're both true and they're both valid. And so I think that we need to look at the grades of where that discrepancy occurs and see what sort of repair or escalation is required.
Awesome. I really like the next question and looking at your statement on the word fine and that not being an emotion.
Yeah.
Um, if you're in a leadership role,
Yeah.
how would you suggest responding to that? Because you want to,
If someone says they're fine.
if they're as a leadership person, because they
Mm.
want to make sure that they keep up a positive environment for their staff. Uh,
Ah.
how would you suggest a leadership person or a person in a leadership role respond to that question without saying fine?
I love that question. And Brian, you know how passionate I am about
Yeah.
this subject. And that's why I'm writing I mean, some would call it a book. I would call it a 250-page harangue on this topic. But anyway, so I think that I would really think about, so we don't want a totally open playing field and we don't want an ironclad door. We want you to think about your disclosures as a leader as a fence.
Mhm.
You decide what you keep out, you decide what you let through. So if it was me, and granted, listen, I'm a business owner, I have a team of 6 people. but I live my mission, so I realize my situation's a little different.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, I would just think about what is the critical information they need to know, that I am not a superhero and I don't
Mm.
even get the cool outfit, by the way. I have a problem with that. I'm like, you can expect give them the outfits
Yeah.
from the Marvel and the DC comics if you expect them to act like they're not human. I would think about, what is the critical information they need to know? What are the most helpful ways I can humanize myself as a leader? Because it is important that people don't think you're endlessly boundless. Because how can you continue to serve as a leader if people expect that of you? But also understanding, yes, there are opportunities for chronologically aged adults
Mhm.
to also support leaders, that is allowed, versus not putting them in a situation that just isn't appropriate. So
Mhm.
let's say, for example, that you're just struggling with just like a down mood in general, or you're struggling with energy, not necessarily a mental health condition.
Mhm.
Someone saying like, "Oh, how are you?" It can be as simple as saying, "Oh, I'm hanging in, just kind of struggling recently with all the stuff on my plate and trying to be better about asking for help."
I like that.
Nice and simple,
Mhm.
high
For sure.
level, not too deep. Be honest, but just think about how do I humanize myself without overwhelming them, but giving them the opportunity to support me.
I like that.
I see nothing wrong with that. And some really great things come out of it. My husband's former job, his manager, and his manager was maybe like 5, 7 years older than him. They're both adults. And his manager was going through a really tough time with his marriage and some health things. And there were many occasions where he would support his boss and be like, "Hey man, how you doing? I know XYZ is going on. Like, is there anything I can take off your plate? Like, do you need to go for a walk?" They're both adults, like why not? So just find that way to humanize but not overwhelm.
I like that. And the
Thank
last
you.
question, Mel, is does mental health conversations or discussions differ if you're a small, sorry, I just moved, if you're a small business where you have fewer employees and leadership is ownership?
Say that one more time so I can make sure I understand.
Does
My
mental health
brain glitched for a minute.
does mental health conversations or discussions differ if you're a small business where you have fewer employees and
Yes.
leadership is ownership?
Yes, absolutely it can, especially if there's no HR department. And I think the most helpful thing to do is to just call that out and name it. There's a lot. I actually got an inquiry from a business, the smallest business ever to reach out to me, a team of five, two owners, three team members. And she reached out to be like, we don't have an HR department. I know our team
Mm.
is struggling. I don't want to force them to open up. Could you just come do like a stress management workshop for us? And that's an accessible topic. You can encourage people to seek mental health resources, outside of the company, whatever. But I think that it's important to name to people. It may not feel comfortable or quote safe to speak up to a leader who's an owner
Yeah.
and to just call out that power dynamic. But then you have to give something in its place. So depending on, and again, depends on the resources you have, what you're allowed, what you can afford. Health insurance ain't cheap. Resources are not cheap. So it could be, even if you're not comfortable to talk to me, I do care about mental health. I want you to feel supported. Here are some resources that are outside our company that I think are really helpful. So even if you're not comfortable to tell me what's going on, I just want to make sure that you get the support you need.
Awesome.
That's the
Mm.
show of care without being intrusive.
I like that.
Thank you.
Awesome. Those are all the questions that are out there right now, Mel. There is a shout out for Lola in the chat. Um,
Oh, yes, I saw you saw on my website. Yes, Lola is the chief parking officer. She's my baby. She just turned 6 and she keeps morale high. But she does not care about the CEO's mental health. She is competitively compensated for the user experience she provides. However, I don't experience that care in return. But actually, if it's okay, I would love from this group, if you feel comfortable, just to type your key takeaways and your key learnings from today's chat in the chat.
Yeah,
Would
please
just like to
share.
hear, yeah, like what kind of hits you like a ton of bricks, or what do you want to look into or do differently? And real-time role modeling to inspire each other. So we'd just love to see some comments in the chat from y'all.
Yeah, please share your experience on today. We will also be doing a follow-up survey, a post survey that you'll be able to add your comments to. The first book that Mel did, we do have a few copies. So all of you here who are attending will get a chance to win one of the copies that we have. So I'll reach out to you by
Oh,
email. I have your email addresses in the registration that you folks completed. Um, Also, we will send a follow-up email once the recording is ready. We'll include the link to the
yeah.
recording as well as links to Melissa's book and other information that she has. Um, but Amanda, I don't know if you're here, but if you can put the link to the follow-up survey in the chat, we'll also include it in the email. And then looks like there's a couple of folks who typed in.
Yes, managers need mental health support, and
Mhm.
sharing our feelings with others breeds honesty. And all good perspectives on mental health and wellness, good mental health in the workplace. Appreciative that you like my straightforwardness. I like humanize without overwhelm. So simple and true. I'm thrilled to hear that. And please, to all of you, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. For those of you on Instagram, my handle is at the Wandering Mel, like someone who wanders around because I like to travel. And for any of you, if I can support your organizations around mental health, team dynamics, communication in the workplace, whether that's virtually or flying out to your organization, I have lots of concrete, practical skill equipping services. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm trying to help as many people as possible. And I see here some other folks. Excellent brown bag. Mahalo. Yes, I'm so happy you loved it. Honesty equals vulnerability. Advocating for yourself is a sign of strength, not weakness. Yes. Yes, a million times yes. It takes strength and courage and guts to tell people that you're struggling, because the easier thing to do is to lie. Stay weird. Yes, stay weird and also take care of yourself. And because I said the word earlier, we also want to do that. So say thank you to my husband. He's the one who got these for me. But what a great group. I'm so happy that y'all came. And again, if I can help you in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I hope you action what you learned so we can all, it takes many voices to make this change. So join me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Just by being here, you're making tremendous gains towards reducing the shame and stigma associated with mental health, especially that in the workplace. Look out for an email by Friday with the link to the recording, as well as I'll be reaching out to some of the attendees to let them know that their name was randomly picked to get one of the books. And hopefully, you'll be able to join us next year when Mel is here in person. We're hoping for May, but we'll keep you updated on how that goes.
Yes,
Aloha,
come
everyone.
give me a hug. I love giving
Yes,
hugs and
she does
talking to
give great
people.
hugs too.
Oh, thanks, Brian. All right, y'all. Thank you
Aloha,
so much.
everyone. Take
Mahalo.
care.